My guests today are Danny Habel and Tony Stoller, two trustees of the Licoricia of Winchester Appeal, a charity named for Licoricia of Winchester, a Jewish businesswoman who has been described as the most important Jewish woman in medieval England. Thank you both for joining us.
Pleasure.
Good to be here.
So let me ask you both, for our listeners who may not know, who was Licoricia of Winchester?
At a time when women really were very nondescript and not in the histories much, she stood out. She came to our awareness as the wife of Abraham of Kent, and she must have been a desirable woman because when after he died, she was left with 3 sons and a daughter. But David of Oxford, one of, if not the richest man in England, divorced his wife just to marry her. She was a businesswoman that of obviously some repute. They had a child together, but unfortunately for her, David died 2 years after they were married and a year after they had their son, Asher. He left a vast sum of money, but she also had her previous business that she was running, and she was made the most of it on her own as a single mother with now 5 children in a very hostile society. She stood out because of that, and she survived. She was murdered when she was in her late 50s in 1277.
1277, yep.
Yes. And so that's just a brief summary of who she was.
Yeah, we're talking 13th century here. So we're talking the last century in which the Jews were permitted to remain. And having been brought across by William the Conqueror after the magic date of 1066, they continued and were very much under the patronage of sympathetic monarchs. So Licoricia was there as an associate almost of Henry III. You then ran into the Barons' War. Henry III was replaced by Edward I, and things got a good deal stickier. But you are talking about the commercial community of England in the mid-13th century, in which she was highly significant and remarkably and unusually so.
I was going to say, it sounds unbelievable that she was, because, as you've said, Licoricia lived in England at a time, when anti-Semitism was not only tolerated, but actually written into law, with King Henry III introducing the state of Jewry in 1253, which served to further segregate Jews, even requiring them to wear a badge to identify them as Jewish. And then in 1275, Edward I introduced a different piece of legislation, also called the Statute of the Jewry, which segregated Jews even further and prevented them from practicing usury. And in addition to this, Jews were being accused of the blood libel and were victims of discriminative taxation. Tell me, how, despite all of this, was Licoricia able to not only survive, but actually thrive as an influential and successful businesswoman?
I would say she was a well-educated woman, because the Jewish tradition at the time was that boys were certainly expected to learn their scriptures in Hebrew, but girls were also given a proper education to write and to read. This would be a common part of the community. That stood her in good stead, because as time went on, she was obviously a bold woman. She was, as Tony was saying, she was close to Henry III. Winchester was the city where Henry was born, and he was here quite a lot of his life. So she would go into the royal court and address the king and the courtiers in French, in their language. She would be dealing with people in the local community in English. And as part of her very controversial, very, very confrontational business of finance, she would be in court quite often acting on her own behalf in Latin. So she was able to face up to people, but at the same time she was a community leader, so she was able to. Strength of character seems to come through very much in her story as to how she would survive and flourish in that society.
Yeah, the Jews were known as the King's Jews. They were effectively owned by the monarch. And so they got caught in this three-way struggle through the century between the king on one side, the barons on another side, and the clergy and the church. And neither the barons nor the clergy would go out of their way to help anybody in the Jewish community, indeed quite the opposite. So they were very dependent upon the king. So Licoricia must have been hugely dependent on the king, even though, Danny, am I right, she was imprisoned for 8 months in order to get money out of her at one stage?
Yes, she was imprisoned a few times, didn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. So must have been hugely dependent on the king. You ask how they survived. I think they survived at the king's pleasure, and Licoricia also at the king's pleasure. So you lose Henry III, you get Edward I, you get extremely anti-Semitic demands by Simon de Montfort and the barons. Licoricia is murdered. We don't think we know why. I mean, the guess is this might have been a way of somebody avoiding paying back money that was owed to her. It's 1277. 13 years later, the Jews were expelled anyway. So, yes, you're quite right. She was a remarkable survivor. I suspect she wasn't the most comfortable people to be around, but my goodness, she made her mark.
Absolutely. And, you know, it actually, from the outside perspective, it could be seen as a bit random that there would be a charity named after Licoricia of Winchester, not because she isn't important, but because there have been plenty of important people throughout history. And I'm wondering, what is the story behind the Licoricia of Winchester Appeal? How did this come about?
That's one for you, Danny, definitely. You were in at the beginning.
Okay. Yes, I suppose I would give the credit to Sue Bartlett, who was a lady of Jewish heritage, and incidentally, she was the first woman to be the chief executive of Hampshire County Council. She fell ill, and looking out of her back window across the road was an archaeological dig going on, where they were looking into the Jewish cemetery of medieval times. And she took that as an incentive to begin to be a student. And she did lots of research, and she found Licoricia to be the standout character of her time, and wrote a book, which is, it's an academic book, really, but it's called Licoricia, Marriage, Motherhood and Murder. And that describes the lifetime of the Jewish community of Winchester from in the 12th and 13th centuries. So she was a standout character that really provided us so much to learn from. That her message of survival comes through the fact that she was a single mother, that is relevant to today. She was charismatic as a community leader. She did a number of things to support the Jewish community of the time, not just to provide money, but actually to argue their point. So she was the person to follow, to put as really the way that we should be learning from.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you ask why her. You could really ask why anybody. But there's no physical record in Winchester of the medieval Jewish community. There's a pluck up for the Huguenots, etc., etc. There's nothing for the Jewish community. And Danny, I mean, you were particularly active in trying to address this issue.
Yes, I suppose that's true. So with Sue, I didn't really get to know her until she was close to the end of her book, and going over there, and seeing her I'm afraid she wasn't well at the time, but she was still a good company, very aware and very warm and welcoming. But what it illustrated to me was that Winchester did have a Jewish history, which I, though I was born in Winchester, knew nothing about. And I thought that was a bit strange and needed looking at. So anyway, a couple of years later, we got started on what became the Medieval Jewish Trail, which is a route around the centre of historical Winchester, pointing out places of interest from Jewish history. And once that was up and running, the Winchester Tourist Office launched that in 2015, and my friend Maggie Carver said, well, that's all very well, but there's nothing to see, and we ought to be doing something about that. And so she got in touch with Hampshire County Council, and from that led to sort of ideas and just springboarding concepts of what could be done, and they came up with the idea of a statue and a little spot in Drury Street in Winchester, less than 100 metres from where Licoricia lived, which would be the ideal positioning for a statue. So that was how Licoricia came about, and that's how the idea for the statue came up, really.
Danny, am I right that Drury Street wasn't called Drury Street when the Jews lived there?
No.
It had an Anglo-Saxon name, and only after the Jews were expelled was it named Drury Street as the street where the Jews used to live. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, it was perhaps in the mid 14th century, so 50 or more years after they left, did it become known as Drury Street. And so why was that? Who knows? It could be that it was a nice part of town with some fond memories of a community that was no longer there.
Yeah. Or
it could be, well, that's the part of the city that we would never want to live in, and you lot that are there, we can put you down.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
But, and who knows which is more likely? But that's yes, it became Drury Street at that time, and I guess has been known that, with maybe a short break at one point where the name was changed, but it's been Drury Street for a long time, for centuries.
Yes, there was an effort to rename it, I think, wasn't there, last century, and that was resisted. I don't know by whom, but it's certainly firmly Drury Street now. And with Licoricia there, looking across at where she used to live, I think it's there for quite some time. I hope it is, anyway.
It is now.
And this statue that was commissioned, it was only erected a few weeks ago. I'm wondering, it's not just of Licoricia, is it? It's also of her son Asher. But Licoricia had a few children. I'm wondering, why was Asher in particular included in the statue?
Again, it's because she was more than just a businesswoman. She was a mother. And that's very much part of the role model that she portrays, as far as we're concerned, as the Licoricia Appeal. That it's very much a rounded figure that she must be seen as, because Asher was a part of her. As he grew up, he joined the business and they worked together. Very much he was part of her life, and that's the way that she ought to be seen. She still, I mean, the sculpture portrays her as a determined woman. She's striding ahead, and she's sort of half dragging him, and he's a preoccupied child. He's playing with a dreidel. So this time of year, the temperature now is about right for him, I suppose. But so they're just a normal sort of family, really. And but it's the strength that she has, that she carries with her, that the statue does well in portraying, I think.
I think he was the youngest of her children. Is that right?
He was the one that came from the second marriage.
Yes, from her marriage to David. He was imprisoned. I mean, famously, or probably infamously, he was imprisoned in the tower within Winchester Castle, known as the Jews' Tower. And the Jews' Tower was partly there for protection, so the Jewish community could withdraw into there when threatened, which they often were, and partly for them to be imprisoned. Now Asher was imprisoned, and didn't he write some graffiti on the walls at one stage?
Yes, it was. Again, this was a tax demand that all the Jews of Winchester were dumped in and held there for some time until they coughed up. And what was it? He inscribed on the wall. It was what did it? I can't remember. What did he describe it as? It was Emor, which would be the Sedra, the portion of Torah that was read that week, in 1287. Was it? Or it was April 1287. And he gives the date, and he categorizes it with a Jewish reference, and that's the note that he was there, and this was the Jews' Tower. Unfortunately, after the Civil War, Oliver Cromwell destroyed Winchester Castle, so the tower is no longer there.
And the inscription did survive for a while, didn't it? But it has mysteriously been wiped, because a lot of these attitudes and prejudices are not stuck back in the 13th century.
No, as we know, unfortunately. Danny's just said a bit about how he came to be involved in the charity. I'm wondering, Tony, what was your involvement? How did you get involved with the appeal?
From my point of view, well, William and Maggie Carver and Danny were striding ahead with this with a couple of other trustees, and I was approached by Maggie, actually, to say, would I be interested in becoming the sixth trustee? I think possibly with an eye to the fact that I have done some media work in the past, and I might come in useful that way, and I jumped at the chance. I also knew absolutely nothing about Licoricia before I started to get involved with the charity. Completely closed book to me, and I regard myself as an historian. So, it's an awful lot to learn, but it's been great. It's been huge fun. Lovely people to work with. The odd ups and downs, but no, it's been great. And I mean, it's not something I often say. I'm so proud of that statue up there now. And I guess, Daddy, you must feel the same. It just looks terrific.
Yes, it's just an amazing event that it's actually a statue to a Jewish woman being part of the ancient city where I was brought up. And I think the point that Tony's making there, that he, though he's interested in local history, knew nothing about it. It just goes to show that this was very much a hidden topic that has only recently come out altogether. And I remember distinctly when we started the Medieval Jewish Trail, I got a meeting with a couple of the leading Winchester City tour guides, and these are people whose full-time job it is they study the local history. They know intimately what happens in street by street of a city, and they're the people that are there for tourists and there for consultation, and they talk to each other about history all the time. And when I started talking to them about it, they were literally jumping up and down in the air with enthusiasm, because there's something new that they had to learn that they knew nothing about before. And so they went away and did some research, and they've added to our knowledge and the story now.
The story of Licoricia wasn't a secret. I mean, it's covered by Simon Sharma in the second volume of his Story of the Jews. And there's a superb book by a local professor from Southampton University, Professor Tony Kushner, which traces the history of Jewish immigration right back to 1066. And Tony Kushner has worked with us as well. So it wasn't a secret. It's just that most of us didn't know about it. So it's been a great learning process, and I'm sure that will continue. I mean, Danny, you said a couple of things in this discussion which I didn't actually know about. So yeah, we go on learning.
Sure, but the reaction we've had locally has been very positive and proud. Actually, people have been proud of the fact that there has been a history that some people are ashamed of because of the despicable treatment of a minority group, but they're proud that this history was there, that it was part of the city, and the city's learnt from it and moved on, is, I suppose, the way we'd like to view it.
Well, Winchester's history is now marked by two statues. There's the statue of King Alfred at the bottom end of town with his sword and his helmet. And at the top end of the town, there's a statue of Licoricia. And that really does set the seal on the history of Winchester, a royal city.
Mm. This this didn't just gain the attention of locals, did it? Because Prince Charles was supposed to unveil the statue in Winchester. Unfortunately, a few days prior to the event, it was announced that he had contracted COVID-19. But I want to know, how did Prince Charles come to be involved in this?
Well, he's your friend, Tony.
He's your friend?
Well, no. I think we asked him. I mean, I don't know the detail of this, but my understanding is we asked Clarence House whether he would be interested in doing this. There is a royal connection with the location because the Duchess of Cornwall, Camilla, opened the Discovery Centre outside which the statue is now placed. So there is a link there. But Prince Charles has shown a lot of interest in interfaith work, and particularly in the fate of the Jewish community. In recent times, he commissioned this magnificent series of portraits of Holocaust survivors. So I suspect when the point was put to him or to his team, they would have said, actually, yes, this is exactly the sort of thing that HRH would be interested to do. And when we know he was dreadfully disappointed not to be able to come to the unveiling, and is planning to come at an early opportunity to look at the statues. So the link is still there.
How lovely. Now, this episode is being aired at the start of Women's History Month. And Danny, you've said before that in addition to raising awareness about anti-Semitism and important Jewish figures, another big motivation for you behind the statue's creation was that you felt it was equally important to shine a light on a significant female figure in history. Tell us a bit about that.
Right. Well, at home, I've got 3 girls, and I've seen them struggle in bringing themselves up there, establishing their identities and becoming part of life. It's hard in society today, and Licoricia was the sort of determined person that could lead you through, and so she would be an example, and really an example to them of how to, first of all, to be prepared to accept responsibilities and to do the things that they have to do, but also to be proud of themselves and for what they are. It's perhaps with an added complication of a strong Jewish identity in an area where there is not a big Jewish community. It's a help to put forward the difficult parts that women have in life today. Also, Licoricia is now about something like the 35th statue of a woman in the whole of England and Wales. If you rule out Queen Victoria and if you rule out royalty and mythological figures like Wendy from Peter Pan and those sort of people, there are about 35 women, which is perhaps a bit of a disgrace for the nation.
I mean, statues are not a neutral matter at the moment, as we know. Um, but to have more statues, I think when Ian Rank Broadley, who's a sculptor, when he started off doing the work, there were 29, and there are now, as Danny said, there are now 35 statues of women. And yet statues raise all sorts of questions, as we know, but they're part of the physical architecture of our cities and our towns, and there should be more women. So we're delighted that we've added at least one to the count.
Absolutely. Now, some people might hear Licoricia's story and mistakenly think that anti-Semitism in England is consigned to the history books. We know this is wrong. And obviously, conditions for British Jews today are very different to medieval England, but anti-Semitic tropes are still propagated, even in politics, and physical attacks on Jews not only occur, but are on the increase. What lessons are there for us from the past in how we tackle anti-Semitism today?
Gosh.
Well, I'd say in Licoricia's time, there were certain tropes and the concepts and way that people thought about Jews, and strangely enough, they're exactly the same as today. So they were in their time, they were all rich, whereas the truth was that Licoricia may have been very wealthy, and there were literally a handful of wealthy Jews, and they were forced into a position to lend money and provide money for the king. They didn't have much choice, and the other Jews didn't have a choice either, because they weren't allowed to do the sort of jobs of everybody else, and they ended up, by and large, as being tinkers and merchants, and in the main that's what they were, though because they were educated, they did also act as scribes and doctors and medical consultants, because they had an education. But that was always a problem for Jews to earn a living. So they were all rich. They were corrupt. They had foreign interests, because they would be in connection with the Jewish community of northern France. They would be, so there was international trade which the Jews were brought in to encourage, with William in 1066, and that was a positive, because actually it does show that we have the same sort of demons in life today, that bankers are at the bottom of the list of popularity, but without bankers, you've really got difficulty with commerce and prosperity. So the Jews in their day would have brought prosperity to England, but that in itself made them unpopular. They were Christ killers, so they were demons. They were evil, and that was the theme then. And they were also the child murder libel came in, the blood libel that came in. That was invented in England in the 1140s. There was a child murder accusation in Winchester during Licoricia's time, and that actually the Jews were, after having paid their way to get out of jail, were actually found that they were dismissed, because the woman who actually did murder the child admitted to it, and so they were found to have nothing to do with it. But this child murder, blood libel, is a thing now, and now it could be argued that the state of Israel is our sort of evilness, and Israel is the great child killer. So these are the sort of allegations that come now, which are founded in the 1200s in Licoricia's time.
I think I'd take a couple of examples. Danny, as long as you're not requiring me to defend bankers, I think I'd take a couple of lessons from Licoricia for now. The first one is, actually, this never goes away. Something about the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. The price of not having anti-Semitism go out of control similarly. It needs constant attention, constant correction, constant challenge when it arises. But I draw a more positive lesson as well from what we saw when the statue of Licoricia was unveiled and in the lead up to it and subsequently, which is the strength of interfaith support is now remarkable. I mean, we had tremendous support, not just across the different elements of the Jewish community, but from the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, the Quakers, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Muslim communities in Winchester. We were delighted that the Dean and Sub-Dean of Winchester Cathedral joined us for the unveiling and have been really supportive to the project right the way through. A lot of people came together on that occasion of the unveiling to lend their support to what Licoricia stood for. So she stands for a correction of the anti-Semitic tropes, but she also stands for interfaith because Jews are not the only people who suffer prejudice these days, and certainly to see the Muslim community there was tremendous. I mean, there's a real common identity there, and I think Licoricia contributes tremendously to that, and I hope as we take the project further forward, we'll be able to make even more of that.
I should also add that it wasn't just that, but there aren't that many things that actually bring the entire Jewish community together. And we had the chief rabbi of the United Synagogue was there, the leading rabbi of the Sephardi community, the leaders of Reform and liberal Judaism were there. So the Jewish community of the UK was also very much in evidence as one, and spoke to each other and were very nice to each other, it seemed to me.
You mean they're not, of course, they're always nice to each other. You needn't comment on that.
Yes, no, they were conversing very merrily between them, and with as well as with other priests and ministers. And
I mean, we reckon there were 200 Jews in Winchester in Licoricia's time, out of 8,000. I shouldn't think there are that many Jews in England, in Winchester now, out of 50,000. No. So it was a significant community, and to be able to echo that in the modern day, it has real resonances for us. I think it will be important going forward, locally as well as we know nationally and indeed internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on your website, on the website of the Licoricia of Winchester Appeal, it says education is the key to the elimination of prejudice. I wonder if you could tell me a bit more about that, and how do you think this sort of education would best be carried out?
We are an education charity, and really it's education is at the centre of all of this. We've been working closely with Hampshire County Council through that, with the religious education advisor, and they have come up with an education programme which is geared for children in reaching Key Stage 3, that's sort of 12-year-olds, 12, 13-year-olds, which is to teach them the value of diversity, of identity, of sympathy with other people's identities and what they're looking for and what they identify with in life. So it's tolerance, community, the wider community. So we have been concentrating on the Jewish aspects of this story, but actually it's in today's world very important to bring in every other community. We all have a value to add to our home, the home community, the home society, and that we want to be part of it. We should be allowed to become part of it with our own values and our own culture as being accepted there. And this is really where we're aiming. I think you know quite a lot about who we're going to be appealing to, Tony, with the sort of education aspect of it.
I think we'll be working forward on this, yes.
Yeah.
But a lot of the emphasis is bound to be on schools, because that's an obvious place to start. We hope we'll be working also with colleges locally, with the University of Winchester. And it would be nice to think we can actually spread that educational effort to adults as well, including those within our own communities, because I think we both owned up to the fact that we weren't all that well informed to begin with. So
Absolutely.
I think the educational element of this project will come to dominate as we go on. I mean, up until now, it's been a focus on getting this statue in place. So there's a physical representation of what the project's trying to achieve. Taking on from here, really education, which has always been present, but it will become more and more important and more significant. And I think we'll get a lot of support. I mean, I anticipate it will be a very interesting academic topic for people at a sort of senior educational level. And clearly the children are fascinated by it, even just to stand by the statue now. And you actually see a series of parents bringing their children to look at the statue, to be photographed by the statue. And this will roll forward, and we will be developing educational materials and informational materials as well to go along with that and to enable and enhance that. There is a forthcoming book written by Rebecca Abrams about Licoricia of Winchester, which will bring modern scholarship to bear upon this. There's also we know it's a very accessible book, so it's going to add to the whole idea of the project going forward, and we all look forward to seeing that soon.
Yes, that should be out in April or May.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What message would you like to give our listeners to take away?
Come and look at the statue of Licoricia of Winchester, and then think about it. And if you can't look at the statue, because I imagine your listeners are quite widespread, then go onto our website, www.licoricia.org, and take a virtual tour and see what it is, and see if you are as inspired as we are.
Yes, I agree with that. It's actually seeing there and being with her there in her environment is it just because we're biased? But it seems to be affecting a lot of people who have been there to see. She's and you can view her as a local woman that was really very much part of the community here in days gone by, with a different sort of background, unusual. But now the emphasis must be on how we can fit them in and they can be part of our new community, our current society, to look forward together and sharing our values.
All right. Danny, Habel, Tony Stoller, thank you both very much for joining me on Podcast Against Antisemitism.
Thank you.